Welcome back everyone, my name is Mario and like always I hope all of you are doing well. So yeah, let's continue where we left off last time. So in the last video we talked about the very basic tools in ZBrush, and this time around we're going to talk about those complementary tools. And you also notice that we're going to have sort of like two sets of workflows. One workflow is going to be sort of like this brush oriented workflow, and second workflow is going to be more this like technical side of it all and how to clean it all and what things we need to kind of like take care of as we're working, just that we are sort of like prepared once we come to, let's say, that cleanup part, that we actually know what to do, how to clean, and why we're using things the way we do. So yeah, so here I have two subtools prepared. So again, these in Photoshop would be kind of like layers. Here we're going to refer to them as subtools. And I have one that is sort of like this, let's say, brush oriented workflow. And the second one is going to be more like that technical workflow, what happens after we, let's say, have that cleaned up mesh. All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about masking, polygroups. We're going to talk about how to manipulate polygroups. We talk mirroring and deleting. So these are kind of like things that are very, very specific also to polygonal softwares. Also like how to isolate. So for example, how to solo the object regardless of which one is selected. We can solo one or the other. So let's say alt tapping is going to be selecting the object. So you're going to see here that it's switching. So regardless which one you alt tap, that one is going to be your active. I have a hotkey setup, which I'm going to talk in the next video, how you can set your own hotkeys. But just to quickly mention that if you control alt click on any part here in the viewport, you're going to see top left, it's going to say press any key combination to assign a custom hotkey. Just press any combination you want, and that is now becoming your hotkey. So in my case, Control 1, same like in Maya, top click, Control 1, top click, Control 1 to isolate. And that is kind of like the basic kind of like isolation method. The next method that we need to talk about is going to be mirroring. So a lot of stuff that we do in Maya, let's say work on one side, we mirror it on the other, or we work on one subtool, we want to convert it into two, or the mirrored side. In ZBrush, mirroring, it's going to be found under geometry and then under modify topology, and then we're going to have mirror and weld. And that is basically it. Another very important, when we're talking about mirroring in ZBrush, it can be sometimes a little bit not different, but it has its own kind of like unique way of approaching the mirror. So let's say that you're working something on the right side and you forgot to turn X on, that you work on both sides, and you don't really want to undo all of this. So you just want to kind of like mirror it on the other side. So if you use again, modify topology, mirror and weld, you're going to see that this kind of like object of yours disappeared. This means that you actually need to go first under deformation, mirror, which will actually flip it on the other side, because mirroring in ZBrush, at least when it comes to geometry, modify topology, mirror and weld, this tool works only on left to right. So whatever is on the left is going to mirror it on the right. So if you work on the left, nothing is lost, you just use mirror and weld. But if you work on the right side, first you need to flip it and then mirror it back. So one also important thing to mention about all of these menus. So it might look overwhelming, but in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can create your own custom menus, so that once you have those custom menus, you can work full screen. Actually, let me show you that real quick. So I'm going to use my preferences config, restore custom UI. This is basically my custom UI, and this is how I like to work. And I have a lot of, actually not a lot, I have only two custom-made menus, which I'm using, and whatever I need, I just call it through those menus. So I don't need to scroll through anything. Everything that I need is exactly there. Like I mentioned, I use very minimalistic tools, which allow me for this kind of like full screen workflow. So I'm going to talk about it next time, but just so you know that you don't have to be, it can be a little bit intimidating at the very beginning, a lot of menus, a lot of scrolling, but I assure you, once you kind of like get used to the tools and the basic tools we're going to use, it's going to be much more fluid workflow in itself. So this is kind of like mirroring, and this is kind of like flipping it on the side, let's say soloing the object. Let's now talk about deleting. So deleting in ZBrush works a little bit different again than we used to in, let's say, Maya or Blender, because let me just enable here. So I want to enable here polyframe and line turned off. So you have here polyframe, you're going to have probably something like this. If you disable line, you're going to have only fill. And what fill means, it's going to show you only the active polygroup. So again, Control W is going to set the polygroup. So you can see that we're just switching between those. And this is going to be kind of like our active polygroup. So deleting works a little bit different than Maya, Blender, or Cinema 4D, where you have, let's say, selection in Maya, and then you delete that selection. So here it's kind of like you have your selection, but you delete everything that it's not that selection. So just to quickly demonstrate. So to create a selection, Shift Control. So remember, Shift is smooth, but Shift Control is going to be select rectangle. And if you go here, you're going to see there's going to be a lot of options. You can also go to select lasso, but rectangle is going to be just fine for now. So if you go to select rectangle, you can select the parts of the object, and this part of the object stays. That means we're deleting everything that is hidden. If we are Shift Control, so the same thing how we use that selection, if we click on it or just tap it, then we inverse that selection. If we Shift Control tap on a viewport, we bring that selection back. The same approach is going to be if we select this, Control W to assign a new selection or assign new polygroup, Shift Control tap away. Now you see we have two selections, one left, one right. And then now we can decide which one we want to delete. So it doesn't have to be that we have that both selections, it can be only this. And then we go to geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. So that means that we now deleted everything that is hidden. What I mentioned with the polygroups, if you set the polygroups like this, it's just going to be easier sometimes to click stuff away like that without selecting them first. So again, you're going to select the thing which you want and then simply modify topology. So again, geometry, modify topology, delete hidden, and then everything that it's not visible, it's going to be deleted. All right, so this is kind of like manipulating polygroups and deleting objects like that. So similar thing is going to be, let's say, with masking. If I remove this away. So masking. Masking is going to be useful in a sense that whatever is masked, it's not affected by anything. So that means if I use, let's say, this brush and start painting around the mask, you're going to see that the mask is not affected. Same thing with the move. If I decide to move things away, you're going to see that that is not affected. So this is kind of like interesting thing about masking, because what we can do is we can select a mask, and if you Control click on the mask, you can make it smoother, or Control Alt click on the mask to make it sharper. There's a whole menu here called masking, and you can do the same thing here. So inverse, clear, or mask all, sharpen mask, blur mask. So it's kind of like same settings there. So again, Control select, Control Alt to sharpen, Control tap to smoothen, or Control tap outside to invert, or Control drag to release. So you're kind of like clearing all the mask. So Control to select, Control drag to release, Control select, Control tap to invert. And this is kind of like the basics of masking. Same thing is going to be with the polygroup. So whatever is masked, we can go Control V to apply, actually Control W to apply new polygroup. So Control W, apply new polygroup. Now we have 3 different selections, and again, Shift Control, we can select each differently. And also we can select, let's say, one, double click on it, and then select the other one, and then now Shift Control rectangle drag, and then you can now also invert that selection if you want to, and again Control W to set a new polygroup to that as well. So it might take some time until you kind of like get used to that. So again, Shift Control drag, Shift Control Tab brings it all together. So masking works only with Control, but selection works everything with Shift and Control. So it's usually always going to be Shift Control Tap, tap away, tap, tap away. So tap or tap one more time to invert. And same thing it's going to be with masking. So let me just tap this away. So again, Control, tap, tap away, and drag. So it's really just those two. So remember, masking is going to be Control, and Control Shift is going to be selection, and that is basically. And then Control W, selecting a poly. So again, the polygroups are going to be important because again, let's say we select this, Control W, we have now two polygroups. They're going to be important because that is how we're going to manipulate our, let's say, objects. So we can, again, like we mentioned before, we can split it. Let's say now this is, let me duplicate this. We can split it. Now we get two pieces. So whatever was different color, that is going to be also deleted, actually split. So I want you to delete this. All right, so that's kind of like the basics of polygroups, the basics of masking, basics of, let's say, how to do a quick mirror, how to do a delete. Let me now show you a couple of other features where polygroups are going to be really, really important. So this is now covering the part of that technical things where polygroups become important, and that is going to be geometry. So let's say we have here divide, dynamic subdivision, which again, dynamic subdivision works in a sense like smooth preview, like we mentioned in the previous video. So smooth preview in Maya is going to be your dynamic subdivision. Divide is going to be adding topology. As you can see here, active points, the more you divide, the more topology you're going to get. So that's going to be the difference between the two. So right now we're going to use dynamic, and maybe you had something like this. So smooth subdiv, once you increase, you're going to see that it's becoming smoother and smoother. So we're going to use polygroups in this case to manipulate the form. So for example, you're going to see that we have two sets of color, and that means both colors are separate polygroups, which means I can now select this one, click away, select this one, click away, invert and whatnot. So we can now manipulate this form because again, this is a new selection. The way we're going to manipulate this, in our case at least, is going to be using creases. So what we can do here, let me just also show you. If you go to crease polygroup, right now you won't see much. But if we go back to dynamic subdivision and hit the dynamic, now you're going to see what is happening. That actually, whenever there was a polygroup connection, that means that something on that connection needs to happen. And in this case, we are using creasing to use polygroup and to put creases on that connection between the two polygroups. The only issue here with creasing is that once we crease, let's say, different polygroups together, we're going to get this ultra razor sharp corner. Now, there's a setting here that is called crease level. And under dynamic subdiv, you have here smooth subdivision. Here it's set to 7. As long as the crease level is higher than the level of subdivision, that means you're always going to get a sharp corner. When you start decreasing on the crease, when you start decreasing this to, let's say, something like 3, 4, or 5, you're going to see that now we are starting to get a little bit softer corner. So this is how we're going to, let's say, use polygroups in combination with creases and dynamic subdivision, let's say, to create interesting looking corners. And then on top of that, let's say we combine it with move to curve, or actually with move brush, we can actually manipulate, let's say, still these points much easier, let's say, and put them in a position, and then let's say control how sharp of a corner do we want to have along the way. So this is kind of like the interesting part about, let's say, using creases and polygroups in that sense. But again, we're going to talk about that a little bit later as we go kind of like deeper and deeper into sort of like these technical things. But this is kind of like going to be a big part of, let's say, the workflow that I use. All right, so here I want to talk about another feature, which is creating thickness. So if I shift control tap on this polygroup right here, I can go under modify topology, delete hidden. and then I have only this part right here. So this is something again in Subd that we use often, and now you're going to notice, for example, that we have clipping here, and this clipping comes from normals not showing from the other side. So if you go to display properties and turn on double, now we're going to see both sides. Now there are a couple of ways to create thickness, but easiest for now is going to be through, if we go to geometry, and then if we go to edge loop and then panel loops. So here, if we set, I think default is going to be 5 and polish is going to be to 5 or bevel is going to be to 50. I usually set everything to minimum values. So loops 1, thickness can be, let's say 0.1, polish 0, bevel 0, profile, and the only thing that it's important here is elevation, 100 or minus 100. 100 means when you press panel loops, it's going to create thickness on the outside. If you go on 100 minus, it's going to be on the inside. So this is again now the way how we can, let's say, create thickness on a single part. So now the same process continues. We can turn on dynamic subdivision, and also what we can do, let's say go to crease, and then let's say crease polygroups, and then we get, let's say, something like this, uncrease polygroups or crease all. Then we get, let's say, something like this, and then we can also then control, let's say, crease level to get, let's say, sharper or smoother. Now there is also, of course, version where we go to Z modeler. So just press Z modeler and go to spacebar while hovering over the edge, and then go to crease and crease edge loop complete. That means simply the full edge loop. And while you're gonna see that it says edge loop complete. That means that currently that function is active. So it means also that it says Alt is uncrease. So when I hold Alt, I can uncrease this part, and then I get a clean part like this. So this is now going to be a way, kind of like that technical part, how to clean and manipulate geometry even further. So now let's say when we come to this point, I want to divide this even further, let's say to level 6 or 7, and then I can turn off dynamic. And now what happens is that this is now my geometry. So I don't have any more kind of like dynamic subdivision on. This actually became my geometry. So that's kind of like the difference. And now when that is my geometry, I can go to, for example, and I'm going to use a standard brush, turn polyframe off, and maybe divide it one more time. And let's go into alpha, and let's say pick here, I don't know, here default one. I don't know. So let's say this one. And then instead of dots, we're going to use drag rectangle. And then we're going to get, let's say, something like this. So let me just show you one more thing with material. And let's use even more divisions, because for alphas, we need to have kind of like cleaner geometry, and intensity maybe a little bit higher. And there we go. So now we have, let's say, an alpha on our object. So one more option here I would like to cover, and that option is, so let me actually create 1 and 2. So these are going to be kind of like details on our surface later, and how we create, let's say, clean surface, and that clean surface we create, let's say, micro details. So what happens is, for example, that as we're detailing, that sometimes, like we mentioned before, we can go back into the history and just remove parts that we don't like. But what if, let's say, we went this far, we have this level of detail, but we don't like the first detail, and now I need to go all the way back, kind of like, and start everything from the beginning. There is a feature here which is called Morph Target. So when we go to Morph Target and store Morph Target, that means that as we are, let's say, drawing here, we can now come back with the Morph brush and simply remove, let's say, the first one that we did. So again, this is kind of like just a set of useful tools that we're going to use as we go. So this is kind of like the basics of I don't know, cleanup using creasing, using polygroups, using Morph Target to manipulate the forms and shapes as we go. All right, so here at the very end, I just want to cover one more interesting feature, and that is going to be found under Preferences, Tablet, and then Use Tablet. So for example, when we're using masking, we covered that we can select the mask like this. Let me just put the material. But we can also draw a mask manually. So we can draw a mask like this. But you notice that the mask here is not as clear as this one. So it has this sort of like fall off, and it's very pen sensitive. If we go under Preferences, Use Tablet off, then you're gonna get mask that you can paint on that it's same intensity like if you would use so like this rectangle selection. So this sometimes very, very useful if you wanna draw so like precise mask without worrying that your tablet pressure is on. So sometimes if tablet pressure is not strong enough, you might get select soft mask, but if tablet pressure is strong enough, you get stronger mask. So this is sometimes very, very helpful to have off. Also, in sense, it's helpful to have it off if we're using, let's say, damp standard brush and creating, let's say, panel break, that your panel breaks always are consistent. So same thing is going to be if you, let's say, hold shift while creating a panel break, it's going to be perfectly straight line. So again, holding shift, holding shift, holding shift, holding shift, it's always going to be kind of like same depth and all. But if this would be on, then maybe the depth depends on your tablet pressure. And when we're talking about hard surface, this is something that might not be useful every single time. All right, so finally, I would like to talk about materials, because materials in ZBrush work a little bit different than they would work in Maya or Cinema 4D Blender, where, for example, in Maya, we just take a material and simply apply it. Here, you notice that as we're switching materials, that materials are also updating in our scene as well. So the thing how to do to apply material permanently is going to be based on these features right here: mRGB, RGB, or M. M is for material, RGB is for color, mRGB is for material and color together. Alpha I'm not really using, so won't be talking about that much about that. So applying color only. So if we go here and apply, let's say, a singular color and select RGB, we need to go into color menu, fill object. That will give us color only. So if we change a different material, color stays, but material changes. If we go mRGB and go to color, fill object, then the material and the color changes as well. So whatever I do now, you're going to see that only the bottom material changes, but the top one does not. So that is basically the basics of applying materials. I'm going to show you one more thing, and that is going to be, again, really, really quick. So basic material 2, color, fill object. If we want to remove all of this, so if you want to remove and come back to the original, you need to use here flat color, color, fill object while mRGB is on. That means that now, once you're switching between those like basic materials, you're gonna get that basic color back. So again, if we go to madcap gray, now we have our basic color back, and again RGB, color, fill object. Now we have no longer material affected on our surface. So this is how we approach materials. There's one thing, like I said, I would like to mention, and that is creating your own. So for example, under, let me just use different one, basic material 2. Under material, if you go to modifiers, there are 3 features here that are interesting for us. So one is going to be diffuse, specular, and diffuse color. Ambient usually like to turn all the way off. So if you use diffuse color and play with the diffuse and colorize diffuse maximum, you're going to get this diffuse color to your material. And then with diffuse and specular, you can control how shiny or how much of a diffuse control you want to have over, let's say, that material. Of course, you can save that. So material, either save the material or save it as a startup. So that means that every single time when you create a new scene, that material, and I have that as well, it's going to load in. Last time we talked about lights. Just make sure that the madcap materials are not affected by light. So madcap materials, you're going to see here, if I show you even clearly, I'm not sure if I mentioned that previously, but I'm going to use very strong color here. You're going to see every single material here down has slight color touch to it, but matte cups do not. So metal will have a blue color and matte cup will not. So just the difference between the materials in case you're interested. And yeah, I'm not sure if there is anything else here to cover, but these are kind of like the most, I would say, general or complementary tools that we're going to use moving forward. In the next video, I'm going to show you my custom UI and how you can customize yours and how you can create menus that you just simply put all of these features that we just covered into your menus so that you do not need to select, let me just go here, config, restore custom UI. So that basically you can work like this and that you can access every single thing. And you can see here that all the basic brushes that we kind of mainly covered, use tablet. Okay, AccuCurve I didn't mention, I can mention that still, but majority of these tools that you see here that we just covered, I have them as so like this call out menus. And same thing I have for the tool menu, this one right here, which is typically found on the right, so that whatever I need it, I can just call it like this. So there is no need for kind of like this clustered workspace, especially if you like to work kind of like full screen and kind of like minimal distraction. So yeah, we're going to talk about that next time. But yeah, for this time around, I would say that this is more or less it. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'm going to see you next time.